Have you ever walked into a room where the music seemed to know exactly when to make your heart skip, where the lights softened the hard edges of the world and left only longing? Have you ever watched two strangers cross a crowded dance floor and realized too late that everything about that night had been arranged? Every laugh, every glance, every touch, so that one life could change forever. The nightclub in Tel Aviv was built for forgetting. It rose from a narrow street that smelled of coffee and salt, squeezed between a boutique and a shuttered textile warehouse. From the outside, it looked like many other late-night promises. A matte black door, a discreet bouncer who took his job seriously, a neon sign that blinked with a name people often mispronounced. Inside, lacquered booths wrapped the dance floor in protective curves. Mirrored columns caught the light and splintered it into 1,000 private reflections, and a bar that could pour liquid courage into any doubt. The music pushed and pulled like the sea. The crowd answered in waves. They called the place Knox. It was the sort of club where diplomats loosened ties and young entrepreneurs learned what they couldn't learn in meetings. Celebrities passed through on good nights. Intelligence officers passed through on better ones. The city loved it because it hid people who wanted to be invisible. And intelligence loved it because a place where people tried to disappear was also a place where the most revealing things sometimes slipped. On a humid night in late spring, the lights were low and the club packed. The founder's portrait, an almost legendary figure in Tel Aviv's small circuits, hung over the mezzanine like a benign guardian. Crowds leaned close to hear lyrics. Strangers traded stories. And outside, the city moved on in that impatient Israeli rhythm, taxis honking, late buses groaning, the smell of late-night shawarma mixing with the sea breeze. Among the bodies moving to the beat was a woman whose name would later be spoken softly in interrogation rooms and loudly in intelligence briefings. Her name was Maya Abramov. She was 34, elegant without fuss, dressed in a way that said nothing and suggested possibility, haircut to the exact angle that made her cheekbones an argument rather than a feature. Maya had the kind of eyes that watched for exits. She had learned to observe because she had once been powerless, and watching was the first practice of taking power back. Maya did not work for Mossad, not yet. She worked in a legal aid office and kept her mountains of worry folded into neat folders when she went home to a one-room apartment on the third floor of a building that always smelled faintly of garlic. She had a nephew who called her Teta and recited the alphabet with a confidence that made her cry sometimes. She had a husband who had left 5 years earlier with a grocery cart of reasons and had never come back. She had debts that slept under the cushions of furniture. She had a laugh that surprised herself when it came. That was the woman who would, in time, become a key instrument in a plan that would string a spiderweb across an entire chapter of the city's underworld. Across the room, balancing a drink in his right hand and a practiced indifference in his gaze, was Victor Haruni. He was 42, with the kind of face that could slide under a dozen passports without raising eyebrows. He had the quick, peripheral awareness trained into men who survive on the move. A barista who could read a crowd before he made coffee. A courier who knew the weight of a package by how it shifted when he walked. To friends, he was charming. To enemies, he didn't have the luxury of being. He had been in places that left their fingerprints on him. Alexandria, Marseille, Beirut, places that gave him efficient habits and tidy regrets. Victor was visiting Tel Aviv on business, or so he said. In truth, he was visiting a promise that had been made years earlier and was finally due. They met at the velveted edge of the dance floor. Maya, who usually watched from the safer shade of the booths, moved toward a friend with the pretense of rejoining laughter. Victor eased into the space as if he belonged there, as if he had owned an address in the city for decades. Their conversation began with the comfortable vices of small talk, wine, the band, the weather, but it tightened into something else, a shared history fabricated in the moment, suggestions of places they'd both loved, jokes that landed with the ease of rehearsed lines. Victor listened like a man who had read people for a living. Maya talked like a woman who wanted to be liked, and for reasons she didn't immediately understand, wanted to be seen. The operation that would later be called Nightshade did not begin in a dim club with a wink and a handshake. It began in a planning cell where every word had its cost. It began in rooms with whiteboards and maps and agencies that spoke in acronyms and legalese. It began with a directive from a ministry that believed that sometimes intelligence was less a matter of brute force and more a matter of seduction. The idea was not new. Honey traps had a long, uncomfortable history. What the planners in Tel Aviv wanted was not just seduction, but surgical precision combined with a moral calculus that weighed consequences against outcomes and decided the country's long-term safety had to be protected. Mossad's case officers moved quietly through the city's social arteries. They learned the club's rhythms. They befriended bartenders and DJs. They celebrated birthdays they didn't attend. They left small, genuine kindnesses like breadcrumbs so there would be no suspicion when favors were asked. They identified the regulars who attracted trouble the foreigners who looked like they meant business, and the politicians who liked anonymity. A nightclub is an ecosystem. It can be cultivated, nourished, and, when necessary, tended like any garden. Maya's recruiter had an even quieter name, Ronan Klein, an operative who had earned his stripes not by flamboyant action but by the persistence of observation. He had a patient style that resembled mentoring more than recruitment. He had been in Israel's service for nearly 2 decades, and the job had taught him one unglamorous lesson. People are made of stories, and if you learn which stories they cannot resist finishing, you can lead them where you need them to go. Ronan found Maya at a pro bono legal clinic, where she had come to complain about a contractor who'd ripped off a client. Ronan's approach was not a dramatic knock at her door. It was a well-worded email forwarded by a friend, then a polite phone call, then a coffee offered under the pretense of advice. He never showed his hand. He showed interest instead. He listened to the parts of her life she was willing to share and kept a mental tally of the things she didn't say. Ronan's superiors wanted operators who could sit with ambiguity and not demand clarity. They wanted someone who could tolerate deception without becoming consumed by it. Ronan had a daughter who studied geology and a father who argued politics at the kitchen table until they both softened at the edges. He kept photographs in a small frame on his desk, and sometimes at night he would stare at them and measure the cost of the work against the faces that smiled beneath the glass. Recruiting Maya was not an act of cruelty for him. It was a hard necessity. There are decisions intelligence services make that are shaped less by certainty and more by the anxious calculus of possible futures. Once an operative like Maya was identified as a potential asset, the process became about shaping possibility. Without crossing into coercion or cruelty, Ronan and his small team began to arrange moments where Maya would be more likely to encounter people who could help her. A benefit for a local charity, a networking event that raised a few hundred shekels, a legal seminar where a man happened to spill his drink and invite her to help. They nudged, they encouraged, they allowed interactions to bloom in ways that felt natural. If you plant a seed in the right soil, people will grow toward the light without realizing someone has prepared the ground. Victor, the man who would be central to the trap, had his own story that made him vulnerable. He was not an archetypal villain. He wasn't a caricature from a spy novel. He was a man whose life had been shaped by a series of gradual losses and small compromises. He had once loved a woman who had chosen safety over passion, and somewhere in those choices he learned to value the currency of secrecy and the kind of temporary satisfactions money can buy. He ran small, legal businesses that masked his other activities, and he traveled often, always with a neat, rehearsed version of himself in his pocket. He prided himself on control, but control is a fragile thing, easily upset by the wrong desire or the wrong devotion. On the night Maya and Victor met, what followed was not a cinematic montage of seduction. There were no sudden declarations, no stolen passports. Instead, there were hours, a slow, carefully paced series of moments that softened resistance. Victor complimented Maya in a way that felt specific rather than rote. He noticed the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way she reordered her thoughts before speaking. He asked about her nephew in a way that made the boy real rather than a prop. Maya noticed that Victor did not ask for her home address or invite her to extravagant getaways. He offered small gestures, a joint charity donation, a business card with a polite note. People are most dangerous when they seem ordinary, and Victor's ordinariness was an art he had honed. The night grew later, the crowd thinner. The DJ played a track that traced memory more than melody, and in the pause between songs, the club felt like a small island in a storm. Victor and Maya left together. They did not talk about politics, work, or the motivations that would later matter. They shared history in the way all strangers who are about to know each other share it, the narrative of the self, shaped into a version that fits into a stranger's ear. The night outside Knox smelled of rain, or fumes, or possibility, depending on who you asked. They walked under a single streetlight that made the world seem narrow and intimate. When Victor kissed her, it was not a cinematic act of entrapment the way novels dramatize such moments. It was a human exchange, awkward, startling, the collision of loneliness and desire. It is important to say here with clarity that Nightshade, the operation that followed, did not traffic in cruelty for its own sake. Its premise was not to humiliate but to gather information and exploit a moment of trust. In intelligence work, moral lines are drawn and redrawn to meet the contours of threats that are described in broad technical terms on whiteboards. The men and women who plan these operations believe often sincerely that the stakes justify the means, preventing a massacre, stopping the flow of weapons, protecting lives that cannot speak for themselves. This is not a justification justification so much as an explanation of the logic that can lead careful people into morally compromised choices. Maya's involvement grew beyond a single night. She received messages, text messages that felt like continuing threads of a conversation rather than the start of something secret. She accepted invitations that began as casual lunches, then lengthened into dinners where people listened in a way she had rarely experienced. She began to talk about her life in ways that were both intimate and safe. She described the small betrayals that had shaped her, the quiet ways she had learned to protect her family. Victor's questions were delicate and precise. He asked for stories more than facts, and when she answered, he would listen as if her words were rare delicacies. Behind the scenes, the Mossad handlers catalogued everything with clinical attention, not party details of private life, not salacious gossip, but patterns. What did she reveal when she felt praised? What did she conceal when she suspected judgment? How quickly did she reply to messages? Who did she call at 2 in the morning? The team watched for the small inconsistencies and the larger commitments. They assessed risk, legal exposure, emotional harm, the possibility that the target might discover the operation. They weighed these against the potential gains: access to an influential foreign operative's communications, opportunities to observe networks crossing the city, and the possibility of collecting evidence that could prevent a future attack. There were moments when Maya's curiosity changed the dynamic. She asked Victor, innocently, about the kinds of people he worked with. She wondered aloud about travel. She mused about how easy it must be to live in so many places at once. Victor would laugh and deflect, offering vignettes that were long on glamour and short on detail. He would say things that built a sense of shared risk, and then draw back just enough to keep the mystery alive. She began to care for him, in the way people care for those who offer complicity, with the quiet gratitude of being seen. The club, Knox, remained the engine of their private world. It was where they tested each other, where whispers could be turned into truths or folded back into lies. Maya found small joys in the evenings: the perfection of a late-night sandwich, a street vendor who always added extra pickles, the way the DJ could make a room of strangers move together without anyone asking why. Victor cultivated a persona of cosmopolitan indifference. He told her that he had been in Tel Aviv for work, for business development. He spoke with the casual authority of someone who wanted to be believed, and because he spoke with such ease, people believed him. What neither of them knew, at least not in full, was that the web around them stretched further than the city. Signals bounced between embassies and safe houses. Men and women in crisp suits and plain jackets pressed their ears to earpieces and listened to conversations in distant rooms. An analyst in a secure facility watched a live feed of the club's client list and cross-referenced it with known associates. A satellite imageologist reviewed aerial photographs of shipping routes and routes of movement. This was not a one-man drama. It was a choreography of many small, coordinated acts. The danger of any honey trap is a moral hazard. What begins as controlled entanglement can grow beyond the planner's ability to contain it. Feelings once formed do not respect operational boundaries. People fall in love with the wrong people. They make choices that reveal more than anyone intended. For the handlers in Tel Aviv, each step was a narrowing spin of choices. They had to keep the narrative plausible, to keep the subject unaware, and to ensure that the consequences, if they came, could be managed within the framework of international law and diplomatic reality. Late that summer, a single event tilted the operation from possibility into motion. A foreign businessman, someone who had been under observation for months, arrived in the city with a confidence that drew attention. He had a record of opaque transfers, of meetings at odd hours, of a willingness to push rules when it suited him. He liked clubs. He liked loud music. He liked to see what people would give him when he smiled. To those watching, his arrival looked like an opportunity. To those making decisions, it looked like a clock finally aligned with hands at midnight. Maya, increasingly entangled, was offered a new invitation: a private gathering, a small dinner at a restaurant that specialized in letting guests forget the city for a few hours. The dinner would be intimate, hosted by Victor, with 3 other guests who shared various professional connections. It was the kind of invitation that felt flattering and dangerous, a line drawn in the sand that felt both protective and exposed. She accepted. When she arrived at the restaurant, the host greeted her with a smile she had seen days earlier. The table was small, lit by a single candle that made the group's features both kindlier and stranger. The conversation began with the polite arts, where people had been, what they had eaten, how they liked their music. Then talk turned toward travel, then toward coincidences, then toward the kind of secrets people tell when they have had enough wine and feel safe. At some point, laughter quieted, and a voice, low, assured, made a passing remark that would later be quoted in interrogations and memoirs alike. Sometimes the world lets you choose between 2 bad things, and the trick is picking the one that hurts the least. Maya, who had learned to choose small mercies in the face of few options, nodded. She did not realize then that those words would become a private motto for a whole set of people who had been taught to decide between bad things because the alternative was worse. The dinner ended like many evenings in the city, with goodbyes and promises of a next time. Maya left the night feeling oddly buoyed. She had an impression of belonging, and more dangerously, of being indispensable to someone who wanted to be her companion. She texted her nephew a photo of the city lights. She thought of the small thread of safety that had appeared in her life. She did not see the thin, tightly wound net that had been cast around her life. Back in a secure room, analysts compiled the night's evidence. A set of patterns began to emerge from the chaos. Small transactional phrases, the rhythm of meetings, the proximity of certain names to others. The pieces did not yet reveal a complete picture. No single image makes a mosaic, but the pattern of behavior suggested potential access to networks that could not be ignored. The team's director paced a small office, looking at screens that displayed connections like constellations. He was not a man given to melodrama, but the stakes were simple and severe. If ignored, these threads could knit together into a plan that would harm innocence. If pursued, they might disrupt a network and expose lifelines of finance and weapons. For the operation to succeed, a decision had to be made: deepen the engagement or pull back. It was a choice every handler fears. Deepen the engagement, and you risk emotional harm to the subject. Pull back, and you risk losing an opportunity that might be impossible to recreate. The decision was unanimous. Maya's world tightened. Invitations came more frequently. She began to trust Victor in ways she had not trusted another person in years. She confided in him in small rooms and whispered on park benches. She told him private things: how she missed a brother who had shifted away, how she felt guilty about accepting the smallest luxuries, how she sometimes feared that what safety she had built was cobbled together and could fall away. Victor responded with care. He offered comfort like a practiced hand, steady and reassuring. At night, when she lay in her small apartment listening to the city breathe, she sometimes wondered whether the feeling she had was real or a testament to her own hunger for companionship. There is cruelty in entanglement by omission. People seldom enter love to be used. They enter it because it is the most human of diversions. Maya's kindness toward Victor was genuine, and that complicated the calculus of the planners. Operatives were trained to accept such complications. They never anticipated them becoming unbearable. The part of the city that thrives on seduction will always feed on the honest human yearning to be seen. Intelligence professionals who work with emotion know this. They rely on it, and they are sleepwalkers in a terrain of trust. As the net around Victor and the foreign businessman tightened, the focus became not only on what they would disclose, but how they would act when they believed themselves safe. People reveal their most dangerous secrets when they are certain they are among friends. That certainty would be tested and tested again. For now, the club kept turning. Music, light, bodies, lovers, and strangers. Maya and Victor continued their private conversation in the glow of a city that could not yet see the full shape of what was coming. The team in Tel Aviv watched the patterns as if they were simple weather reports, predicting storms from the tilt of the barometer. No storm was inevitable, but storms begin with small gusts. The handlers believed they had arranged the conditions for a controlled gale. The night finished with small human fullness: a message to a nephew, a taxi ride that offered time to think, a street vendor hugging a favorite customer. Maya slept and dreamed like a woman who had not yet learned how to wake without fear. Tel Aviv before dawn looked peaceful, soft light spilling across the Mediterranean, waves breaking against the seawall. But inside the Mossad safe house near Ramat Gan, the air was heavy with tension, the kind that came when everyone in the room knew something had gone terribly wrong, but no one yet knew how deep it went. Leah sat at the edge of a metal table, a towel around her shoulders. Her hair was still wet from the emergency shower, washing off traces of the nightclub's smoke and perfume. Across from her, Baruch stood silent, his eyes locked on the window. The city outside looked indifferent, unaware that within the last 12 hours, one of Mossad's most secret operations had been exposed. "You said someone sold my name," Leah finally said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Do you have proof?" Baruch turned slowly. "Proof? No, but there's no other explanation. The Egyptians knew your real identity, Leah. That means the breach wasn't local. It came from within headquarters." He slid a small folder across the table. Inside were grainy surveillance photos of Farouk and Mahmoud, taken hours after the club raid. Both men were seen entering the Egyptian consulate. What chilled Leah wasn't that they'd escaped, but that one of them had handed over a file stamped with Mossad's internal codename for her, Lotus. That codename existed in only 5 classified systems. "Which means," she said softly. Baruch nodded grimly. "One of ours is feeding them?" The realization hit like a physical blow. For months, every smile, every word she'd spoken in Club Orpheus had been part of a carefully choreographed illusion. But now the illusion had shattered, and the enemy was inside the curtain. By mid-morning, the safe house had turned into a command center. The hum of electronics filled the room, screens displaying streams of data from intercepts, call logs, and encrypted transmissions. The analysts worked in silence, their faces pale under the flickering fluorescent light. Baruch stood over them, his jaw clenched. "Narrow the list," he ordered. "Only people with access to Lotus files. Cross-check with every outgoing communication over the last 48 hours. An hour later, the communications officer looked up. "Sir, we have something." A signal burst from a diplomatic channel at 2:47 last night, originating from the Mossad logistics department. Baruch frowned. "That's not an operational division. Who authorized that channel?" "No one. It's ghost traffic, embedded in a supply manifest update for Cyprus." Leah stepped closer. "Cyprus, that's where Mahmoud's arms routes run." Baruch's eyes darkened. "Pull the logs." A few seconds later, a name appeared on the screen. David Regev, logistics officer, clearance level 3, 27 years old, assigned to oversee equipment transfers for foreign field operations, including Club Orpheus. Leah read the file. "He's not a field man. He wouldn't even have known what Lotus was. Unless someone told him," Baruch said quietly. He turned to Leah. "We need him alive." That afternoon, Leah watched from inside a surveillance van parked across the street from Regev's apartment in Bat Yam. Through the tinted glass, she could see him pacing nervously by the window, a cigarette burning between his fingers. He looked too young, too ordinary to be a traitor, but ordinary men were often the most dangerous. They blended in, vanished easily, and were invisible until it was too late. Baruch spoke over the radio. "He's spooked, probably senses the net closing." Leah checked her watch. "Then he'll run. Everyone does when they realize the walls are moving." Baruch nodded to the field team. "Move." The operatives slipped out of the van, moving with surgical precision. Two approached from the front, one from the fire escape. Within minutes, Regev's apartment was breached. Leah followed behind, gun drawn, but the room was empty. On the table sat an open envelope with one word written inside in careful block letters. "Mirror." Leah froze. "Operation Serpent's Mirror," she whispered. Baruch's voice came sharp through the comm. "He's not running. He's leading us somewhere." Hours later, after searching through Regev's apartment, Mossad's internal data team found the key, an external hard drive hidden inside a radio casing. It contained partial blueprints of the Orpheus operation, including photographs of Leah taken before her recruitment. Someone had been documenting Mossad's honey trap programs long before the nightclub even opened. "This isn't just a leak," Baruch said. "It's an infiltration." He turned to Leah. "If Regev's alive, we need to find him before the Egyptians do, because if they reach him first, they'll have the names of every operative who's ever used a honey trap cover in the last decade." The magnitude of it hung over the room. This wasn't about one agent. This was about an entire network that stretched across half the Middle East. Operatives who seduced their way into embassies, military compounds, and intelligence circles. If those names surfaced, Mossad's quietest war would be over. Night fell again. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm, unaware of the manhunt unfolding beneath its surface. Leah drove through the narrow streets of Jaffa, her earpiece alive with chatter. "Satellite trace found him," came the voice of the tech officer. "Southbound, heading toward Ashdod, dockyard sector." Leah's heart pounded. "He's trying to reach a ship." Baruch's voice came steady, but urgent. "Regev's contact is likely Egyptian intelligence. They'll extract him by sea. You have one chance. Do not engage until he's isolated." The drive felt endless. Waves crashed against the docks, and the night smelled of diesel and salt. Through the mist, Leah saw movement near the cargo containers. Regev clutching a duffel bag, glancing over his shoulder. Two men waited by a small boat, the motor idling quietly. Leah slipped from her car, her weapon low. She moved like a shadow between the stacks of shipping crates. Every footstep was measured. Every sound felt too loud. The men were speaking Arabic, coarse, hurried. One handed Regev an envelope. The other scanned the horizon with a flashlight. When the beam of light swept past Leah's face, she didn't freeze. She moved. 3 shots split the air. Clean, controlled, echoing over the water. The 2 Egyptian agents collapsed instantly. Regev turned, eyes wide, his duffel bag slipping from his grip. "Leah," he gasped. "You don't understand." She closed the distance in seconds, pinning him against the metal container. "You sold us. You sold me." He shook his head violently. "No, you don't get it. I was never working for them. I was working against them." She stared at him. "You leaked my name." "I was told it would protect you," he shouted. "They said they were Mossad, a counter-espionage unit, Operation Serpent's Mirror was supposed to be an internal audit. I didn't know it was Egyptian intelligence until they tried to kill me." Leah hesitated. There was fear in his eyes, but not the kind that came from guilt. It was the kind that came from betrayal, from being used. Baruch's voice crackled in her ear. "Leah, status?" She pressed the transmitter. "I have Regev, but there's more to this. Someone's using our own counterintelligence protocols against us." Baruch paused. "Extract him, now." They drove in silence, the hum of the road the only sound between them. Regev sat in the back seat, hands cuffed, his voice shaking. "I didn't mean for this. You have to believe me. They told me you were in danger, that the Egyptians had planted someone inside Orpheus. I thought I was helping." "Who's they?" Leah asked. "I don't know. The messages came through secure Mossad channels, real ones. That's why I believed them." Baruch exhaled sharply. "That means the system itself is compromised. Someone has root access." That realization was more terrifying than any spy in the field. It meant there was a ghost inside Mossad's own servers, a phantom capable of rewriting logs, sending fake directives and erasing traces. As they reached the outskirts of Tel Aviv, Baruch's phone vibrated. A secure alert flashed across the screen. Priority code, Omega Red, all Orpheus files purged. His blood ran cold. Someone inside headquarters was already destroying the evidence. He looked at Leah. "We've lost the club." "What do you mean?" she asked. "They've raided it, or burned it. Either way, Orpheus is gone." Leah's throat tightened. That nightclub wasn't just a cover. It had been a world, a place where she'd lived lies so deeply they'd started to feel like truth. Now it was ash. By dawn, smoke still drifted over what had been Club Orpheus. The walls were blackened, the dance floor charred, the air thick with the smell of burnt wood and melted plastic. Investigators in unmarked vans sifted through the ruins. No bodies were found. No cameras survived. The entire network had been wiped clean. Baruch stood near the doorway, his coat fluttering in the sea breeze. Leah joined him, her eyes fixed on the wreckage. "It's like it never existed," she said quietly. "That's the point," he replied. "Whoever did this doesn't just want to expose us, they want to erase us." She glanced at him. "Then we're not dealing with Egypt anymore." Baruch nodded slowly. "No, this is someone else. Someone who knows our systems, our habits, our people." Leah turned back toward the smoke. Her reflection shimmered faintly in a broken mirror on the ground. "Then the honey trap wasn't mine," she whispered. "It was theirs." Baruch didn't answer, but in his silence, she could feel the truth settling, like dust around them. The trap had just sprung shut, and Mossad itself was inside it. As the sun rose, Leah watched the first light fall over the ruins of Orpheus. Somewhere deep inside Mossad's encrypted mainframe, a line of code flickered alive again, a ghost signature, the same one used to send Regev his fake orders. The sender ID read Baruch, but Baruch was standing right beside her, and that meant someone, somewhere, was using his name. Someone inside Mossad, someone who had just declared war from within. The day after the explosion, Tel Aviv's morning light felt colder, sharper, like the city itself was waking from a bad dream it couldn't shake. The street outside, what was once orchid, was barricaded off. Broken glass glistened like ice across the asphalt. The nightclub's sign, the glowing orchid that had once pulsed like a heartbeat in the night, was gone. Only the metal frame left hanging, twisted and blackened. Inside, the air still smelled of burnt plastic and smoke. A few officers from Shin Bet moved quietly, taking pictures, lifting debris, searching for anything that could tell them what had happened in the final seconds before the blast. But deep down, everyone already knew the operation had worked too well. Maya stood at the perimeter, in plain clothes, her hair tied back, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. She hadn't slept in over 30 hours. Her body ached, but her mind was still replaying the moment, the split second between when Karim smiled and when everything went white. She had been standing at the far end of the bar, her finger on the trigger switch in her purse. The Mossad team was in position. The signal came in. "Execute." She hesitated just for a breath. That breath would haunt her forever. Karim had looked at her, not with suspicion or hatred, but with something she hadn't expected. Relief, as if he already knew, as if he wanted it to end. And then she pressed the switch. Now, as she watched agents move through the ruins, she realized there would never be a victory in what they did, only the illusion of one. She had destroyed a man, a network, a cell that might have killed hundreds, but she had also destroyed the part of herself that could still feel joy. Her handler, David, approached her quietly, his coat collar turned up against the sea breeze. He looked tired too, but his expression was unreadable, the way only men who've carried too many secrets could manage. "You did well," he said simply. She didn't answer. He studied her face. "The ministry wants to commend the team. You'll probably get a promotion out of this, maybe even a transfer abroad." Maya looked back at the smoldering remains. "A promotion?" she repeated, her voice flat. "For what?" For doing your job, David said. She turned to him, her eyes suddenly burning. I killed him, David. I watched him die. You neutralized a threat, he replied. His tone was soft but firm. You saved lives. She shook her head. You weren't there. He didn't argue. He just looked at her, then handed her a small envelope. Headquarters wants you to disappear for a while. Cyprus, a month off the grid. Rest. Then we'll talk. She didn't take it. You knew what this would do to me, he sighed. We all know what it does, but we do it anyway. She finally took the envelope, turned, and walked away. Past the barriers, past the reporters, past the cameras, flashing questions she'd never be allowed to answer. 3 days later, the file on Operation Orchid Net was sealed. The Mossad archives summarized it in one sentence. Primary target eliminated, secondary cell dismantled, civilian casualties minimal. But the truth was more complicated. Karim wasn't just a target, he was a bridge. His death triggered a series of fractures across intelligence networks from Amman to Istanbul. It caused 3 deep-cover agents to vanish and a 4th to defect to the French. What no one in Mossad realized yet was that the night the nightclub burned, a second operation had also been set in motion. One Mossad hadn't planned, because in the chaos, a woman named Yara, Karim's sister, had escaped Tel Aviv. She had been watching from a distance that night, keeping tabs on her brother's meetings. She knew who had lured him in, and she knew who had killed him. While Mossad celebrated, she crossed into Jordan, carrying with her a list of names. Israeli operatives embedded across Beirut, Athens, and Cairo. A list Karim had hidden inside a microdrive in his watch, the same watch Maya had taken as evidence, now sitting in a locked drawer at headquarters. But Yara had a duplicate, and she wasn't going to run, she was going to wait. 2 weeks later, in a safe house near Limassol, Cyprus, Maya sat by the balcony, staring out at the sea. The horizon was calm, almost too calm, like a lie told gently enough to believe. She had stopped checking her messages, stopped reading the reports. She'd been ordered to rest, but rest was impossible. Every sound reminded her of the explosion. Every silence reminded her of the moment before it. The operation had ended, but something inside her hadn't. That night she woke to a knock on her door. 3 short taps. The agency code for an urgent message drop. She opened it cautiously. A courier in civilian clothes handed her a single envelope and left without a word. Inside was a photo. It was grainy, black and white, taken from a CCTV camera in Istanbul. The face was unmistakable. Yara. And below the photo, a handwritten note. You killed my brother. Now I'm coming for you. Maya stared at it, her pulse quickening. Beneath the note was one more line, scribbled in a language only she and her Mossad handler would understand. A cipher used internally for threat assessments. Priority 1, counter-operation recommended. She exhaled slowly. The past wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. Back in Tel Aviv, David was in the briefing room when the call came through from Istanbul station. The feed was live, footage of a small apartment raided by Turkish security services. On the wall was a map of Tel Aviv. Dozens of photos were pinned to it, all connected by red thread. In the center, Maya's face. David rubbed his eyes. She's coming after her, he muttered. The deputy director frowned. We can't let that happen. Maya's not cleared for another operation. She's compromised. She's also the only one who knows the field well enough to track her, David said. We trained her for this. She can handle it. The director leaned forward. No, not this time. She's too close. It's personal. David said nothing. But as he left the room, he already knew what he was going to do. 3 days later, Maya arrived in Istanbul. She didn't check in with the embassy. She didn't request authorization. She just moved, quietly, efficiently, as she'd been trained. She knew Yara was somewhere in the old quarter, and she knew it wouldn't be long before the trail went cold. Her first stop was a bar called the Mirage, a dim, smoky place near the waterfront where informants traded secrets for survival. The bartender recognized her accent immediately. Israeli, but soft enough to pass for Greek. He said nothing, just poured her a drink and nodded toward the back. There, a man was waiting, thin, nervous, chain-smoking, the kind who knew things he shouldn't. She was here, he whispered. 2 days ago, asked about you, paid in dollars. Maya leaned closer. Where is she now? He hesitated, glancing around. If I tell you, will she die too? Maya's eyes didn't flinch. If I find her first, no one else will have to. He nodded slowly, scribbled an address on a napkin, and pushed it across the table. She stood to leave. But as she reached the door, a man in a leather jacket brushed past her. Too close. Her instinct screamed. She turned. Too late. The explosion from the alley ripped through the bar front. When she opened her eyes again, She was on the ground, her ears ringing, smoke filling the air. People were screaming, running. She tasted blood, and through the haze she saw her envelope, the napkin with the address, burning in the fire. Then from across the street she saw her, Yara, watching. Their eyes met, just for a second. Then Yara vanished into the crowd. By dawn, Mossad knew everything. The Istanbul station sent out a flash alert. Orchid remnant active. Target pursuing agent. David received the message at headquarters. He sat for a long time, staring at the screen before muttering, "It never ends, does it?" He looked at the old photo on his desk of the Orchid team, smiling outside the club before the operation began. Maya was in the middle, laughing. Karim's file lay beside it, a ghost of another life. He made a decision, picked up the phone. "Get me the Istanbul station chief," he said. "Tell them to stand down. Maya finishes this her way." 2 nights later, on the rooftops above the Bosphorus, the two women finally met. The wind carried the faint echo of city noise, music, horns, life. Below them, the water shimmered like black glass. Yara held a pistol. "You took everything from me." Maya didn't move. "I took a man who killed innocents. You know that." "My brother wasn't innocent," Yara said, "but neither are you." The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sound of the wind. Then Maya spoke softly. "Maybe not, but I'm not your enemy." Yara's hand trembled. "Then who is?" "The people who made us believe killing would fix anything," Maya said. "The ones who trained us, used us, and walked away." For a moment, Yara's expression faltered, grief flashing across her face. Then the gun lowered slightly. "I can't forgive you," she whispered. "You don't have to," Maya said. "Just don't become me." And before Yara could respond, the distant wail of sirens echoed across the rooftops. Turkish police, closing in. Maya turned and walked toward the edge. She didn't look back. By the time they reached the rooftop, she was gone. The Mossad file on Operation Orchid Net was reopened, updated with a final note. Agent status, missing, presumed alive. Target neutralized pending verification. Operation concluded. But within the agency, a quiet legend began to circulate, of a woman who had once turned a Tel Aviv nightclub into a honey trap, only to walk away from the service that made her. Some said she disappeared into Europe. Others whispered she worked independently, dismantling the very networks she'd once helped build. No one really knew. But in the intelligence world, one phrase began to appear in intercepted chatter. Codename Orchid Ghost, a ghost who haunted spies, not for revenge, but for redemption. And in Tel Aviv, on the site of the old nightclub, someone left a single white orchid every year on the night of the explosion. No note, no signature, only silence.